Welcome back to another episode of Change Agent Leadership. Today, Dr. Hans Finzel returns to the podcast to talk about change. Drawing from his book, Change is Like a Slinky, Hans is a successful author, speaker, and a trusted authority in leadership. For over 20 years, he served as president of the international nonprofit WorldVenture, working across more than 65 countries. He's written 11 books, including the international bestseller the top 10 mistakes leaders make, which we talked about in the last time he was on the podcast. Now, as president of HD Leaders, Hans continues to teach, consult, and speak around the world on all things leadership. So, Hans, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed it last time, and I'm looking forward to talking about change today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our time together. Several people commented on the last episode how valuable it was, so I know this one's going to be as well. So, as you know, the title of this podcast is Change Agent Leadership. I picked this name because I believe all true leaders must embrace, deal with, and lead through change to be successful. It's just part of leadership. So, why did you get so interested in the topic of leading change?
When I was thrust into the leadership of an international nonprofit, we were on a death spiral. The organization, the board actually brought me in as a turnaround to turn around our death spiral into a 50-year-old organization. When I took over, it was 50 years old. I always like to say every 50-year-old's got issues.
Wow, 50 years.
And this organization, like a lot of, I've studied the life cycles of organizations, you probably have too. And they start out with such vision and enthusiasm and passion. But as the years go by, especially as the top leadership changes, you can go from, passion to paralysis, from inspiration to institution. And that's what happened to the organization I took over. So I remember the day I interviewed to take the job. I said, I don't want this job to be the president of this ministry. I'm not seeking it. But if you think I can do a good job, I just need to know you're going to back me when I start introducing change. Isn't it interesting how people want you to fix the problems, but they don't want you to change anything?
Correct.
This is notorious in churches where a new pastor comes in and, the board says, oh, we want you to fix things. We want you to we want to be healthy again. We want to thrive again like the good old days. Well, are you willing to embrace change? Well, what kind of change, So that's where I first realized leadership is about leading change.
No.
Because nothing is stagnant. We live in a world that constantly changes. And the world of today, we're talking in 2025, and think about how different the world is than just, in the year 2000 or 25 years ago, or even 10 years ago. So leaders have to become experts at the finessing of the leading of change. And the board did back me, just to end that story. They said, yes, Hans, we will back you. And I ended up changing everything over the years. I was CEO 20 years. We did turn things around. Today, that organization is thriving. It's doing better than when I led it, which is what I wanted. But we changed the name, we changed the location, we changed the board structure, we changed the organizational structure, the branding, you name it. We had to change everything to survive.
Well, I think you hit a key point there as we dive into this topic a little bit more is you change to survive, and I would say thrive. That's what I heard, is it sounds like it was thrive. You didn't change just
Yes.
to change. And I think that's a key before we jump in, just to talk about that for a second. A lot of leaders are abrasive to change because they don't understand why there's a necessity. And you talk about that in your book. And I think employees they receive it as, oh, we're changing just because there's a new person. And neither of those are true, right? It really isn't about let's just change to change. And there is a big disconnect. And one thing I liked about your book is we're not going to go through all of the cycles, but as we go through this, I think a key part of this, even, talking about the mistakes leaders make in the last book we talked about, communication is so key, right? Through this. Just touch on that real quick, just at a high level. What have you seen as a disconnect, or have you seen that is most important? Pick either one or both in communicating this change to not just the board, but those people that
Awesome.
have to live with you every day for the next X amount of days.
Yes, we're going to get into the fact that all people resist
Correct.
change. Uh, Communication is the
Mm,
lifeblood of successful change because everybody's against change.
mm,
If they're not in on it, they're down on it, you know? And so I can't tell you how many people attributed wrong motives to my change
mm,
programs. No matter what I was changing, people attributed negative motives and wrong motives. And what's the key to getting people to embrace it? Just what you said,
yep.
communication. I mean, you've got to be in front of your people all the time telling them this is why I'm bringing about change. And what you said about thriving is so important because some leaders, when they take over, they want to change everything because they want it to be their
Mm,
imprint, their mark. And it's almost like an animal marking their territory.
yes.
And I totally agree with you. We can't just change things for change's sake. But I was accused of that. Oh, you just want to change everything just because you want to change everything. No, I want us to go from stagnation to thriving, but you have to unpack the whys
Right.
of why you're on change. So that's, by the way, here's the book. Change is like a slinky, and we can get into why
Yes.
change is like a slinky. But yes, communication is
Yeah. So
key.
let's jump in. That's right. The reason that you triggered a video I watched the other day about CEOs and how their mindset has to be customer oriented, and in the change, your customer is your employees, a lot of times. And so let's dive into the book. You describe change as being like a slinky. You brought up your book. I got my book here. Read it. Change is like a slinky. You mentioned it's messy, it's unpredictable, and sometimes stuck. So, what inspired you to use that metaphor, and how has it shaped the way organizations approach change? I know there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, so what inspired you to use that metaphor? How has it shaped the way organizations should approach change?
I have my
Very
slinky
good.
here, and I don't know when in the middle of all this change, and I decided to sort of write a book about my experience as I went through it. And I thought about that. I love toys. I love enduring toys, and I now have 11 grandchildren and I watch them with their toys. I always say the best toys have no batteries,
That's
right?
true. They last
So,
longer.
uh,
They last longer.
and this thing has been around forever. It was invented by a gentleman who was in the Navy on a boat, trying to figure out how to develop feet for these compressors so they wouldn't
Mm,
shake. Anyway, one day he this thing he was working on, it fell on the deck and it started to walk, and he took it home to his wife and he said, "You think this could be a toy?" And here's the cool thing. The wife actually said, "Yes, I think it could be." A lot of times our spouses think our ideas are crazy. So, couple of things why change is like a slinky. It's very flexible. And if you are a rigid person or you're a rigid organization, you're going to die by paralysis. It's what I call the hardening of the categories. And again, older organizations and older leaders get get stiff.
mm,
They get set in their ways. And Jonathan, I don't think age is necessarily a
no,
physical
no.
thing. It's almost a psychological thing. I know people that are 80 who act like they're 40. And I know people that are 40 or 45 or
Mm,
50 that act like they're 80, right?
true. No, it's very true.
So you have to be flexible. Change is messy.
Mm,
That's one thing. Uh, Blink makes a lot of noise. And change is messy. It's uncomfortable. And the other thing I loved about the Slinky analogy, what do we do with the Slinky when we're kids? Well, we do this. This was a fun thing to The other thing we like to do, I used to send it down the stair
yep.
steps at my house
100%.
to see how far we down the stairs. And that's when you launch a change initiative, it's like launching a Slinky down the stairs. You never know where it's going to end up. Have you noticed
It's
that?
true. It's not going to go the same
You
place
think,
twice.
no, and it's not going to go where you thought
No.
it's going to go. And change creates more change and unpredictability. And a lot of us are very uncomfortable with unpredictability. We think, okay, for example, we changed our location. We moved our offices from the Chicago area to here to Colorado. That was a huge change, but it actually spawned more change. And change spawns change, and it never turns out the way you think it will. So you have to be prepared for being uncomfortable, for things being unpredictable, but it's a good thing.
Yeah.
You got to do it.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like your metaphors there that you're using. The slinky in the metaphor, the idea that it's unpredictable, it's a bit messy, and you don't know exactly how it's going to go because you can start the change, but then it takes a life of its own. And so, um, I
Right.
think one question I had, which aspect of the slinky analogy tends to resonate the most with leaders? Um, do you think it's well, ask the question, what resonates? Because what I heard you saying is a lot of it is mindset.
It is. It's an attitude. It's a mindset of and the leader, by the way, cannot change things alone. It has to be a guiding coalition of people.
Yeah.
My team, the first people I had to sell on any particular change was my own inner circle, right? If they're not on board with me,
It doesn't matter.
it's not going to work.
No, that's right.
I'm preaching this next week in South Carolina on the five dysfunctions of a team. And the first problem usually is the team's not unified. They don't trust each other. So they may say on the outside, yeah, I'm with you on this change. But on the inside, they're resisting it. They don't really buy it. And until the inner circle totally has buy-in to the change, you can't work outward to the rank and file people.
No, that's true. No, I appreciate that. We're not going to go through each phase of change in the book, but you do highlight, looking at my book here, you do highlight throughout the book and even at the beginning, the different phases, the six different cycles of change. And we're going to pick a couple of them to go
Right.
through, but can you just give an overarching view of those six phases?
Sure. Yeah, they are absolutely, and it is like a slinky in that it's a cycle.
Mm,
So phase one is accept the need for change, and that may sound like elementary, but it's true. The first thing you got to do is accept the fact that things need to change. If and why? Why do things need to change? Because the world again is constantly changing, and if you're failing in your organization, you're failing in your ministry, your church, whatever, your school, it's probably because circumstances have changed, your context has changed, your environment has changed. And so you're going to have to change things in order to be relevant. And by the way, some people hate the word relevant. Oh, you just want to be relevant. No, I want to be significant. I always said that I want to be in the center of the action. I don't want to be on the peripheral. So you got to accept the need for change. You got to aim squarely at the future. And that's where you figure out, okay, we got to build a new bridge. Uh, First of all, we got to decide where's this bridge going to go. Number three, anticipate your adversaries and allies. We'll get into this a little bit more later, but everybody resists change, and you can be totally taken out. I remember when I was changing our name, we had a denominational label. Oh, by the way, let me take a better analogy. I've been reading the book by David McCullough, The Wright Brothers, the history of the beginning of airplanes. The adversaries that those two brothers had is unbelievable. The U.S. government was against them. Even the Smithsonian Institute didn't believe them. And I was reading this. One guy was prominent people saying there is no way man can fly. And secondly, why would we? What useful purpose would it be to have a fly
That's
machine,
right.
right?
It's
Those are
true.
the
No, yeah.
adversaries. Love about the Wright brothers, they had all those factors for leading change effectively. And you know what they had? They had faith.
Mhm.
They believed in their cause and they had hope.
Mm.
But you have to anticipate your adversaries. They also had some great allies, their sister and a lot of other people who came around them and helped them. You got to have allies. Again, I said before, you have to have a guiding coalition to help you. Four, advance the plan with courage and tenacity. And again, the Wright brothers took them 5 years from their beginning experiments in gliders until they had the first successful motorized airplane. And it was a tremendous amount of tenacity and courage. If you've if you've read stories of great companies like Stephen Jobs and Apple or Howard Schultz and Starbucks, those stories inspire me because everybody told Howard Schultz when he founded Starbucks, nobody's ever going to pay for more than $1 for a cup of coffee.
Correct. Yet here we are.
Anyway,
Nothing's less than
here
almost 10, but go ahead.
we're
Yes.
spending
Yes.
more on gasoline. Number five, adjust your course as you listen and learn. And that's where you have to, again, the Slinky analogy. It's not, you can't get so locked in. I've seen change efforts fail because the leaders are not willing to pivot.
Mm.
And it's so important as you're going through a change. As we were moving, I had so many town hall meetings with my staff to talk to them about the ramifications. And I listened and I learned and I pivoted and I changed to take them along with me. And number six, align your team as you stay the course of change. That's all about alignment, where everybody from the board to the leadership to the rank and file is on the same page.
Yeah, it sounds simple.
So that's a
Sounds
rough.
simple. You can do that in a couple hours. And but we all know as we've lived through this, you and I have different places. I have and other all the leaders that are listening and those that are coming. This is an ongoing. You mentioned the Wright brothers. I can appreciate that. We'll probably tie into that analogy as we go. But this is a long journey. Change leadership is a long journey. We never know where it's going to arrive or what it's going to look like. And also just every major change we take on, we don't know where it's going to go. So let's start with phase one. We're not going to go through all of them. We're going to pick mainly three phases, which is phase 1, 3, and 6 to talk about today. So phase one is accept the need for change. So, why is accept the need for change a critical first step? And then tied to that, what happens when it's overlooked? Because I know you mentioned you got to have people on board, and it's not just verbally on board. So unpack that a little bit. Why is this so important? What does that look like?
Because a lot of people have the attitude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'll use the analogy when we changed our organizational name. And I had so much pushback, but I realized it was killing us. We had a denominational name. I'm not going to mention what it was, but it was killing us because we live in a world where people don't care about denominations. And young people we were trying to recruit, and they definitely didn't want to have a denominational badge. And so I had to do a tremendous amount of work explaining to people that things were broken. People say if it ain't broke, it's not broken. I love it. And the old timers and the insiders love the old stuff. But I think that an organization should be healthy and thriving and growing. And so the first thing you have to do is accept the need for change. Things have to change. I brought some of my little props here.
Wow.
Here's my first cell phone. This was called the Brick, plugged into my cigarette lighter on my car, which they no longer have
I
cigarette
was gonna say, I don't know if
lighters.
that would work anymore. It doesn't compute to USB.
Right. So this was one of my first phones, and I had this one, my Motorola flip phone. Oh my goodness, I love this thing. This thing was amazing. I remember first time I was driving in my car and I called my mom. I was going to see her and I called her on this phone from my car. And this was like 30 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, I'm coming to see you. Where are you right now? I'm in my car. Well, how can you be in your car and talking to me on the phone? It was hilarious. Uh, the point is things change, life changes, technology. It's not just technology. And Jonathan, are we all overwhelmed by the speed of technological change? And
Very much.
I'm overwhelmed and I'm scared about AI. Everybody's forcing AI down our throats right now. And I don't like the thoughts of where that might go. But let's not get
Sure.
lost on
Yeah.
AI. The yes, the world changes, and I think if you plug this in, I don't know, it might still work, but it's obsolete. And that's the key. A lot of organizations are doing things that might actually still work, but they're obsolete.
Correct.
And that's why you have to accept the need. Like I've seen so many churches who have the attitude, the old timers are saying, oh, let's go back to the good old days. Let's go back and do the stuff we used to do when we were successful, and we will be successful again. Well, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I think it's that
It might
reflection.
still,
Yeah, go ahead.
and one of the biggest um, enemies of an organization are you're all tied up in doing things that work less and less and less, but you're not willing to let go of them and pioneer a new
Yeah.
approach to your mission.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned there, accept the need for change. A key thing that came to mind is what you're trying to do if you're trying to bring the past into it, but is it still relevant today? Because were you trying to recruit different people than your example you gave, or in the phone business, they're not trying to recruit people that or sell a phone that plugs into a USB in your car. I mean, if they were just trying to make the next step of the brick phone, it would be still have a cord and it would still plug in. Well, all phones now, most of them don't even need a cord. They're battery charged, or you can charge them without a cable. Again, it's the progression, and then it is that mindset. Well, my phone still works, but in your case, if you plug that into if you had a cigarette lighter, it's not going to work because the system has stopped. And I think that's a disconnect for people. Sometimes the internal process might work, but the external system doesn't work anymore. Like you mentioned, you're trying to get younger kids. Well, the external system is the younger kids, and they don't understand where your system is talking about, right? There's a disconnect there.
Yeah, yeah.
So moving forward in that, I see that as a challenge. Well, moving on to phase three, anticipate who is with you and who fights change. I kind of almost spit my drink out when I read this part because I was laughing of we don't always take that into consideration that well, I'll put it this way. I think, and tell me your experience, when I work with a lot of leaders, there's an assumption that everyone's going to be excited as I am. Everyone's going to be on board with this idea because it's an awesome idea. And there's often a disconnect there. So you said in your book, anticipate your adversaries and allies is part of the game. So what are some common mistakes that leaders make in this area?
Think you hit it. I think a lot of us leaders think that our people understand what's going on inside our head
Mm-hmm.
through some process of magical
Yep.
osmosis. I remember when I was a young man, my first job out of graduate school, I worked for a visionary leader. I can't tell you how many arguments I had with him because I would say, okay, let's say his name was Joe. His name wasn't Joe, but I said, Joe, we don't understand what's going on inside your head. You keep spinning all these plans, but we don't understand. And he's like, you don't understand? Why don't you understand? And that's where I learned that I think a lot of leaders think that through a process of osmosis, your people understand what you're thinking, but they don't. And people understand what's in your heart. When I was leading the name change, that was where I had one of my biggest blow-ups with internal people who began to rebel against me, and they wanted to get rid of my leadership because they didn't agree that we needed to change our name. And this is where I was so puzzled that they were attributing false and negative motives to my reason. The reason I wanted to change was so that we would thrive and grow, not because I had some egotistical agenda item. And I remember one of my top vice presidents said to me, Hans, they just don't understand you. You know, I understand you because I work with you every day, but they don't. And there's the lesson. See, they don't get what's going on in the leader's head, and it's our job to communicate. And in particular, we're working in 65 countries around the world, and one place, particular in Africa, a whole group of our personnel there were going to quit and go find another organization. They had lost all respect for me. And my Africa director said, Hans, they don't get you. And the only way they're going to get you is for you to sit down in a room with them and explain why you're doing what you're doing. And he said, furthermore, you can't bring them here to Colorado to your office and sit them down and talk to them. You got to go to Africa and sit down in their living room and talk to them, which I did. And I still remember what a wonderful weekend it was in Uganda. And I sat there, and first thing I did is I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry. I have failed you as a leader. You don't understand what I'm doing. I haven't communicated clearly, and you've gotten very upset at me, and you want to quit, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And, that went a long way. I was kind of surprised. And a day later, so we talked, and I explained, and a day later, they asked me to forgive them for deleting all my emails, throwing away all my not trying to listen anymore. And that's what happens, Jonathan. Eventually, communication breaks down and trust breaks down. And then if you can't rebuild that trust through humble communication, all bets are off. Well, long and short of it, it worked. At the end of the weekend, we kissed and made up, and they didn't quit, and they understood where I was coming from. It's where I learned such a valuable lesson. I have to over communicate by a factor of 10. And leaders always think they're communicating more than they really are. So that's why you have to anticipate who's with you, and those who are against you, you have to try to convince them. But let me say one more thing. Leaders sometimes they make a critical mistake when they're leading change. So here's the deal. 15% of the people are your raving fans. In this book, I have this chart about followers and where they're at. 15% are your raving fans who will follow you anywhere you go, no matter what you do. The 15% at the other end are going to be against you no matter what you do. And then in the middle are the people from Missouri, the show me state. They're the fence sitters who, you show me and I'll probably go along with it. So where do you think a lot of leaders make the mistake of pouring all their energy? Into the trailing 15% that are against you. And you will never turn some of them around. Where should you spend most of your time? With the leading 15%. Use them as your coalition to convince the middle people, and then you're going to be good. It's like Moses, when he went through the Red Sea to the promised land, there were some people who were whining and complaining the whole way.
No, it's so true. It's focusing on the right group. I do appreciate your comment there. It sounds like in the situation in Africa, you were able to turn an adversary into an ally. And it sounds like that they were actually maybe on the trailing edge of that middle 70%, right? They were, this time seemed they were against you, but for the wrong reason. They just didn't understand. So how you were able to turn them into an ally, it sounds like, and then they hopefully became not only just an ally, but your communication source to others, which is so important.
They not only became allies, they became advocates for the change. And those are the best advocates, are the people you turn around, and because it's peer to peer promotion,
Yeah.
I would rather those people would talk to all their other peers around the world and explain, oh, this is a good idea and here's why. And that's what happened. So you're absolutely right. Some of your best advocates are the people you turned into allies.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this point, but this one stood out to me a lot. This anticipate, because I think for a leader that may be stressed, is busy. Not that you were stressed when they wanted to quit, but let's say you were, and there's a lot going on. It would have been easier just to say, "Well, I guess we're rebuilding, and we're going to chalk that up to they're just not on board and move on," because it takes more energy to actually try to clearly communicate, build the bridge, understand what the disconnect is, but I think we owe it not just to the team, we owe it to ourselves to learn through that and to grow. And through that, in this situation, it doesn't always go well, but you were able to identify, okay, they're not on my side. Why? What have I done? You took responsibility, and then you moved on and was able to share with them, and they became allies, as you said. How do you think leaders can easily identify those are on board and those who to appear to be on board? Because you mentioned that there's a lot of lip service. Now the group in Africa, they
Yes.
didn't just give it lip service; they sounded very serious. Like, we're out. Thanks for nice knowing you, but that worked out. But how do you talking to leaders? What's a good way or some thoughts on identifying when someone is just giving you the head nod and when they're actually
Yeah.
embracing and an advocate for you?
Yeah, that is tricky. That's why I'm a big fan of the five dysfunctions of a team, Lencioni, because he talks about how many times there are meetings where people will say in the meeting, well, they won't say anything, or they'll agree passively, but then they'll go out and sabotage you. So the first thing you got to do is make sure your inner circle is being honest with you. Vulnerability, honesty, trust. That's where it starts. And there are ways that you can make, you probe for, I like to have messy meetings. I think conflict is a good thing in meetings. And if a meeting is quiet and there are crickets and you're debating big things, then somebody's not being
Correct.
honest. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
A good meeting has disagreements and you plow together and you come up with solutions. Beyond that, I would say if you have an inner circle of leaders, they are the ones that can tell me who's really with me or who's really with us and who's against us. Because it goes down in layers, and a lot of people will never be honest with the top leader, but they'll be honest with their peers and with their, the sub leaders, the managers. So I think you have to work through your team to find out who are my adversaries and who are my
Yeah.
advocates.
And this is not, I guess my last comment on this, and you're welcome to say something else, is none of these are one and done. So this step is not okay, my executive team is on board, we're all ready to go, let's take the next hill, and you all communicate. I think you have to, because life is happening, right? They're having life situations, they're having leadership situations, and it involves dialogue with them and making sure, are we still on board? What and having even more discussions, maybe they're heated about, I believe this is where we're going. Do you believe or not? And continually having that, because they're your vocal box, right? They're the ones that are talking to everybody else more than someone's going to talk to you because they're more accessible. I think a lot of leaders forget that you do have to have advocates because they're the accessible ones. The higher you get, the less accessible you are.
That's absolutely right. Yep. So you just have to, and you're constantly having to cook up new changes. You're right. Okay, we agreed on the last thing, but oh, guess what?
Yep.
The next thing is now hitting
That was
us.
last
And
month.
how are we going to,
Yes.
yeah, how we, you were saying before we got on the air how in the world that you're leading and part of a leadership team, how, things are constantly moving and shaking and just thought uh, it's like that old whack-a-mole game. You thought you had all the things down, and then next thing you know, the next thing
Yes.
pops up that you have to figure out how to solve, and it often involves
Yeah,
change.
no, that's true. And just back to your original point, We have to accept change because it's coming. And so, how do we deal with it? You mentioned AI. We're not going to get into that, but it is coming. Change is here. AI is here. It's not going to go away, I don't think. And so, again, it's having the conversations and discussing that, not just ignoring it. So, phase six, the last phase here, align your team. Yeah, when you say align your team? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, my one of my boys, I have 4 children, and a couple of them really worked on cars a lot when they were teenagers. I remember when my son Jeremy bought this old car. I didn't want him to buy it, but he didn't have any money, so he bought it, fixer upper. And I remember it had a terrible problem with alignment.
Mm,
Alignment is when your wheels are balanced and they're in alignment with one another and you drive smoothly. And if a car's alignment is way off, which can happen by hitting a curb, by an automobile accident, it wobbles. And when it wobbles, it can't go fast. Organizations are that way. And in my mind, many organizations have a board, and then you have your leadership team, and then you have your maybe sub leadership team, and then you have the people, right? And so to me, it's getting everybody on the same page of the hymn book. And I have seen organizations where the leadership team is united, but the board is against them because they don't agree with what they're trying to do. Or I've seen it the other way around where, uh, uh, well, I had a chairman of my board at one point when I was leading this name change who he decided he wanted to get rid of me because he didn't believe in changing the name. And at one point, he wrote a really nasty letter to a whole bunch of people about how I was way off and we needed to get rid of me and all that. And thankfully, in the end, the board dismissed him. But that was a great example of a board and a leadership team not being in alignment on the same page. An organization's not going to work well unless everybody in the organization is on the same page. I'm on the board of trustees at Columbia International University. It's a great school, and we have a wonderful president, Bill Jones, and I've worked closely with him for many years. And he has a passion of going around campus and asking people the mission statement, students, faculty, staff, even our board, what's our mission statement? And I love it because that's what alignment's all about. Everybody knows the building blocks of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that's what alignment is. It's everybody from the board to the leadership to the staff, in this case, students. In other cases, it could be the congregation, but everybody is aligned about where we're going
yeah.
and what we stand for. And a lot of pastors, I know they have an annual sermon where they preach, the vision of the church. It maybe they ought to do it more often, but that's a great example of pushing for alignment.
Well, you mentioned earlier communication, communication, communicate, right? I mean, the rule of thumb is you can over communicate, but most people we're always worried they're going to think it's too much, but it never is. Asking that question is great.
And
So, using your analogy, you just gave me the analogy of the car and the alignment. I totally get that. And so, one of the things that's helpful with the car when it's in alignment, you can let go of the steering wheel. You should do that when you're driving, but if you let go, the car will go straight, right? It goes straight. It doesn't veer off,
yes,
which helps. If
yes,
you were in neutral, it also helps with momentum because it's going to go in the same direction. It takes less effort. You don't have to struggle to keep it on. I had a car that had a really bad alignment. I hit something and it kept wanting to pull to the left. So I'm literally fighting the thing till I get to the garage. So how does encouragement play in sustaining momentum? You mentioned this in your book? How talk about encouragement?
wow. I was just going to say the analogy of the car, the four wheels could be, the board is a wheel, the leadership team is a wheel, the managers are a wheel, and the rank and file people are the fourth wheel, and the leader is driving it,
Yeah.
sitting you know in the driver's seat, making sure that these four wheels stay in alignment. Encouragement. Oh man, that's such a big topic. We leaders have to be encouragers, and I'll have to be honest with you. I struggle with this area. I'm not. I don't have a pastor's heart. I was a pastor for 2 years in my early on in my career, and I realized, boy, I just that's not for me. I'm not saying every pastor has to be have a pastor's heart. You
Sure.
know what I'm saying? But when it come, my wife always says, nurture and encouragement is not a natural part of who you are. And that's one of my weaknesses, Jonathan. I got to be honest. In fact, the guy that eventually replaced me after my tenure was totally a nurturer and an encourager and a pastor's heart. And that's the way the pendulum swings in organizations, right? So I think it's important that we're constantly encouraging our troops. I think it's harder for some of us than others.
No, it's true. Well, you talk about this, the whole phase six, aligning and sustainability. Can you talk about a little bit about you trust and how important that is in keeping change together? You talk about it being the glue. How, you have your different levels in that. How do you continue to build trust? How do you ensure that there's trust? Just general thoughts as people are listening to not take for granted that trust is given.
Trust is really the glue. It's absolutely, if you don't have trust and if trust is broken down, I always tell people if you don't trust your leader, either fix that or you need to leave and go somewhere else. And I think the leader himself or herself need to really talk to their inner circle about trust, and vulnerability. To me, the key to building trust is vulnerability. I remember a critical meeting I had with my leaders, and I opened my heart to this is how you build trust, Jonathan. You get vulnerable. And I told them at one point, I'll never forget, I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. And that's a syndrome. And if you're an adult child of an alcoholic, you have a hard time trusting people, uh, letting them into your heart, being vulnerable. Anyway, unpacked the things that were going on, and a light bulb went on for them, and they were like, "Oh, okay, now we get why."
Yeah.
And it was so healing when I finally confessed to them, guys, this is why I struggle with being open. This is why I'm so driven and independent and don't like to rely on other people. It's because if you grow up in an alcoholic's home, you're an adult in a child's body and you kick into this survival mode and you try to stay out of the fray and you become very isolated and independent. So that's just an example of
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
vulnerable. I think to answer your question, vulnerability on everybody's part on the leadership team builds
Mhm.
trust and
Yep.
honesty. Where you say I had people come into my office and they got really honest with what bothered them about me and it hurt. But I created an atmosphere where you can be vulnerable and you can approach me. And I think it was helpful.
No, well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. I mean, honesty and trust, vulnerability and trust is so huge. You kind of answered my next question, but I'm still going to ask it because I just read an article on this. It's, a lot of people talk about, I've heard it said, most change efforts fail. And I would say I could see where that could be true. But I actually read in a Harvard Business Review article this last couple of weeks stating, I'll read the quote: changing an organization's culture is a vexing leadership challenge, and success is the exception rather than the rule. In fact, they say, based on recent research from 5 academics, a full 72% of companies that have started such initiatives since 2022 didn't move the needle on employee trust, engagement, or retention a full year later. End of quote there. So we got at Harvard Business Review. This is what they do. They do a lot of research, and people are not moving the needle. So I think you answered it a little bit. My question to you was going to be, why are so many companies failing here, and what does move the needle, right? Because they are failing. And you talked a little bit about, the trust and the honesty. Any other thoughts on why today it's so hard to move the needle? Specifically, they listed these things: employee trust, engagement, or retention. So, yeah,
Mhm.
thoughts.
I think it's so much more difficult nowadays to the retention. I think social media has plays a
Mm,
huge part in what makes people pick
sure.
nowadays. And my wife and I just had dinner last week. We were with a couple, and you've seen this too, but next to us was a grandmother, mom and dad, and the two little kids who were like 5 and 8. And both the little kids were each watching a movie on their phones during the entire time at dinner. One of the girl closest to me was watching Shrek, the movie, and did not say a word through the entire dinner. Okay, so we've all seen that and it bothers us, but what's it creating? This is not a new problem, but we're creating a generation and generations of people that don't relate well to other people. I think that's a big part of the retention problem and the trying to build teams and community, whether it's a university or a business or a church. So I think what's going on in our society, we're much more focused in on social media than on learning how to have relationships with one another. I think that's not everything, but
Yeah.
that's a big part of it.
No, thanks for sharing. I think that is part of it. People don't, it's a challenge to know how to be socially aware if you're just using your phone as your friends and not
Yes,
interacting. Even just the two of us talking here, we're recording this, but we're live talking. I'm not typing you a message. So,
yes,
Hans, tell me what you think about chapter 6,
yeah,
because I will never get your real feelings. I'll never get what you really meant by that. If you happen to hit
yes,
all caps by accident, I'll think you're yelling at me. So, it's things
yes,
like that. I think we really need that connection. And so, change doesn't have to fail, but it does take intentionality. And that's what my takeaway was from a lot of your things in this book was the communication is important, the intentionality at every aspect of knowing who's for you, who's against you, moving the process forward. You dedicate the book to dreamers, pioneers, and change agents. So tell me about, what were you thinking when you wrote that statement? Maybe you don't remember exactly, but what do you think you were thinking when you wrote that statement?
dedicating it to people like myself because I'm a dreamer, I'm a pioneer, I'm a change agent. I go back to when my board hired me to be the president. That's exactly why they did hire me because they had the foresight to realize we need a dreamer, a pioneer, a change agent. And I don't think they knew what they were in for, but thankfully they backed me the whole time through all the myriad of changes I led. So that's what I want to encourage any of you who are out there and you're a maverick, you're a dreamer, you're a change agent. You're a Howard Schultz, you're a Steve Jobs. You're the kind of person who has dreams of the impossible. And I encourage you to keep at it, like the Wright brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Don't give up on your dream. I want to leave you with two
Mm,
resources, Jonathan, you listeners that are, if you were to ask me what are other than my book, if you want to get it, doesn't matter. But John Cotter is like one of the Harvard expert on change. He's written a lot of books. I would recommend the book Buy In,
mm-hmm.
Buy In, Buy In. And he goes through those why the 8 reasons why change efforts fail and how to
Mm.
get people to buy into your dreams. The other one would be Patrick Lencioni, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, because, and we mentioned this throughout this podcast today, this issue of trust. That book, I'm teaching on it next week with a team of people who run automotive repair shops all over the Southeast. And what we're talking about is how to build trust. And if you don't have trust on your team's not going to work. So Patrick Lencioni, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. Those are two books I highly
No,
recommend.
thank you. Any other, my last question, for you would be, I was going to ask you, what advice would you give a leader starting the Slinky journey today? So new emerging leaders, maybe they're in their first leadership role and they're going to read your book and they're going to read those other two books, which is great. But yeah, just any advice you would give them based on what we've talked about or where you are.
I would say you have to realize it's not about me, it's about we. You have to don't think you're going to do it all
Mm,
yourself. The best thing you can do is build a team around you, a guiding coalition. You know, you're not perfect. You don't have all the right answers. But I find if you get a great team that trusts each other, together you can figure it out. So it's not about me, it's about we. Yes, I'm the leader, but listen to your leadership team and don't just be too aggressive and too obnoxious and it's my way or the highway.
yeah.
I think teams lead much better than just individuals. So I would leave you with that.
Great. Thank you. I think that's great advice. And it ties exactly back into where we started, which is you need a good team to also speak into your life, my life, to say, hey, Jonathan, maybe we're getting off track here, to speak those hard truths as well, grow together and reach new levels. Well, I just want to thank you again for being on the podcast. It's been great having
Well,
you on. And to our audience, I just would say if this episode added value to your day, hit like and subscribe, drop a comment so we continue to grow this. I will put the links in the show notes to Hans's website, this book, as well as I'll put the two books that he mentioned. Those are great books to read. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Hankin, your change agent coach. Keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading change.